Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and today on this episode, we're going to be talking about producing movies. We're going to be talking to Darren Moorman, Reserve Entertainment, who I'll tell you, the great thing about Darren is he produces movie after movie after movie. And so you're going to learn some things. If you're a writer, a director, a producer, an actor, you're going to learn a little bit about how the production world works, how Hollywood works, and how to get movies on the screen, on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, whatever you choose to do. So it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So stay tuned. So Darren Moorman, I am thrilled to have you on. We've known each other for years and years. In fact, we worked together for a short period. And since then, I've seen your career really take off. So I just wanted to get you together, talk a little bit about the journey toward producing, what you're doing now, what you're planning to do, and give us some advice for young producers out there that are growing up. So thanks for being willing to take some time and do this.
Oh, thanks, Phil. Great to be with you for sure. It's always fun. I have to say to all the young producers out there that it was after I worked for Phil, that's when my career really took off.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know what? I recognized early on that you were going somewhere with your career and we couldn't hold on to you very long. So it was fun to see you in those early days and then see what's happened since then. So I think but I think it is good to let everybody know that working with me, of course, is a launching pad for greatness. We want to get that word out there. Maybe I should put that on my website. So, hey, you as of right now, you just released Blue Miracle. It's been on Netflix. It's been out there for a while now. What's the feeling about that? It was during COVID, I guess, that it couldn't go to theaters, right? Tell me a little bit about the whole Blue Miracle story.
Yeah, so Blue Miracles was a passion project of mine. I first of all, I started my own company a while back, Reserve Entertainment. I got tired of working for other people. No offense, Phil. I love working for you.
Thank you.
But I started my own company, and and really felt inspired to go after this story about this orphanage in Mexico, and it just was incredibly fortunate that it all came together. And when Dennis Quaid said yes, I'll play the boat captain. It was a real dream come true for a filmmaker. He was always my first pick for that role. We got pitched other people, other big names.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, they're a fine actor, but they're not that salty old boat captain.
Yeah, he did a great job.
And
so how did you come across the project? It was a script pitched to you, or how did it happen?
No, it was a news article that came out in 2014, true story about these group of orphan boys in Mexico that win the Super Bowl sport fishing tournaments. And so it was a real, just a miraculous fish story. And this is how I like to put it, since we're talking mainly to Christians. I think if God were writing the Bible today, that this story would actually maybe replace one of his other fish stories.
Interesting. One thing I like about you, I've always admired about you, I have to say, is that you roll one project into another. You just keep producing movies. So many people I meet will come to me and they have a script, or they have an idea, or they have a dream project they want to do, and that's all they got. And the few that manage to pull it off, they got nothing else because they've put everything into that. But you're constantly just rolling one thing into another. And so I'm so impressed with the fact that producers who really make it successfully out there are ones that just keep that ball rolling. Is there a secret to that? How do you do it? How have you been able to make that transition from movie to movie to movie?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think it's a simple answer. I'll put it in old terms. I eat what I kill. And so if I did not get a movie made, we would not eat in this family. So I have kids, and they get up every morning and they want breakfast. For me, it's a real urgency that I have to get movies made, and so I don't have a big investor behind me that allows me to take a year off. So I think that's a big part of it. It keeps me, literally, it keeps me hungry, and pressing and driving to the next thing.
So along that line, how many projects do you have in the works at any given time at different stages, typically?
I'd say I have, 6 to 8
Okay.
feature film projects and then 2 or 3 television projects. Just always juggling and developing and signing life rights or option rights on best-selling books and then getting screenplays written. So yeah, it's a pipeline of content for sure. And and Blue Miracle was one of those ones that it didn't take as long as, like, Same Kind of Different as Me took me a long time.
Yeah.
But Blue Miracle didn't take as long. From the time I found the story to the time it hit Netflix was, I want to say it was probably 2.5 years.
Okay.
So it wasn't that long, because as you know, getting just a screenplay written, it can be a year. So that's just a process. So I have multiple writers going right now on projects, hoping that we get the right director and we get the right talent, and and the financing all comes together.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Directing. A lot of people don't realize just how important picking a director is for a project. When you and I worked together, I was also partners in a commercial company, and we were producing Super Bowl spots and all kind of commercials. And in the advertising world, the director is probably the single most important thing you can bring to a project, because that's what ad agencies are looking for, a big name director. Is it the same way with the movie business?
You definitely want to be strategic with your director. That's what I would say. I love working with writer directors, because then we line up and we work together. We know exactly the screenplay we're writing and the movie we're going to make. So that to me is one of my favorite things. So then it's not, here I got a script, now I hand it to the director who now has a different vision.
Whole vision, yeah.
And so with Blue Miracle, we were very strategic. Julio Quintana, he's Hispanic, and so we really wanted the authenticity, because the movie is set in Mexico, and he did a great job. He actually rewrote the script and gave it that really Latino flair, and I think he brought great authenticity to the project. He's fluent in Spanish. His kids pretty much only speak Spanish. And so I think it was helpful in setting up the financing too, because everyone knew the kind of movie we were making. We were being authentic to the story.
Awesome. Well, you and I have worked in the industry long enough that there are all kind of producers attached to projects. I watched a Netflix show the other night, and there were 12 producers and executive producers on the credit list. That's a different, you're the guy you're where the rubber meets the road. You actually make the project. But to explain to me how the whole thing works, when you see all these producers, are they people who are sleeping with somebody else, or are they just relatives or friends, or how does all this work?
Well, I try to stay out of who's sleeping with who. So I'm not going to answer that one. But so one of the things that you'll see, like if you saw Blue Miracle, no offense to those people who didn't get it, but there were two producers that have what's called a PGA mark.
Right.
And so the Producers Guild of America, gives a credit award, so to speak, for those producers that actually developed the project, got the story, developed it, and saw it all the way through. And then there's producers that come along and they all bring great value, and many of them might watch your podcast, and they're great people, and I've worked with them multiple times, and I'll work with them again. But they came in later in the process. They brought financing. They brought great value to what we did. And so most of the projects that I have are projects that I have come on right at the beginning, gotten the option to figure out who the screenwriter is, and it really helped, because then your fingerprint gets to be on it as a producer, and it allows me to make the movies that I feel like I'm supposed to make.
Yeah. So speaking of movies you're supposed to make, do you consider yourself in a niche? How do you, what is there a category you consider yourself, the kind of movies that you do? Tell me a little bit about that.
One of the things, I think you'll love this. So my company is Reserve Entertainment. I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but the branding is inspired by Jesus' first miracle of turning water into wine.
Oh.
And the guy running the wedding party says, hey, where did this reserve wine come from? And so, what it's always said to me is that Jesus cared about quality.
Interesting.
He wasn't just meeting a need. He could have matched the quality of the other wine that
Yeah.
they had been drinking, but he upped it. And
Interesting.
so this is not an arrogant thing, but this is a thing of saying, I think we as Christians, we need to try to be better than. Because I can't tell you how many times I get pitched, oh, this can be the next Kendricks brothers. And I'm like, what, why don't you let the Kendricks brothers do what they do? Why don't
Yeah, there you go.
you pick what? And so for me, I worked at MGM along the way, and I've worked, in the system, and I know what quality looks like.
Yeah.
And so that to me is what I feel like God has called me to do is these redemptive stories. And Blue Miracle's a beautiful story because it's just a story for everyone, but there's a
Yeah.
beautiful faith thread through it that for those people who have a heart to see it, they love it. And for those people that are just sitting in South America, they're just enjoying the story and they don't feel like they're being preached at.
Yeah.
That's important to me as a filmmaker. Uh, I'm not a pastor. I'm a filmmaker. I want to tell great stories. I want to entertain, and hopefully they all point to God in some wonderful way.
As I watch your movies, they're not explicitly Christian by any means, but there's a thread that goes through them. I think that's really important, and I think there's a real place for that out there. There, like you mentioned, Alex Kendrick. I've known him for a long, long time. He makes, he said I'm not trying to compete with Hollywood. I'm trying to make Christians better Christians. So he makes really explicit films with a very explicit message. You're trying to reach a different audience, probably a bigger audience of people that might be just flipping through Netflix and stumble upon Blue Miracle or Same Kind of Different as Me and have a real redemptive experience in the story. I think there's something to be said for that. How do you find that line? Is it difficult? I'm sure you get pitched movies that don't have that redemptive value to them. Do you turn a lot down in that process?
Yeah, I do. I really do. And I think I'm sure you get pitched a million things because you forward me half of those. Uh, uh, yeah,
Be quiet. Shh.
we have to turn a lot down. I mean, it's just the
Yeah.
reality of one. You can only realistically, I can make maybe 2 movies a year. My goal would be to get to 2 movies a year in television series. But you can't do any more than that. Just how much time it takes. And so you
True.
turn a lot down just because you don't have the bandwidth, but also you turn a lot down because they just um, one they're just a message jammed into a screenplay,
Yeah.
or it's just a story that doesn't. There's no connect to what's important to me in having that faith thread in it. So it is a fine line, but one thing's for sure is that the further I get along, I'm very fortunate. God has continued to give me some amazing stories that are being developed that I can't wait to bring to the world.
Now, as you've got a number of films under your belt. When you started out producing, are there things that are things different now than you expected? Were there things that you assumed or expected about producing that now down this far down the journey, you've realized, man, I was way off base with
Yeah.
my expectation about that? Give me an example of something that has surprised you along the way.
Oh, you don't make that much money. That is.
What?
People think that you're a producer, you're rich. That is the exact opposite. So let's just smash every dream that people have of.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's out. Ultimately, you learn that those people who have the money have the most control, and so
Yeah.
when you're developing projects, you have to align with people that have the same vision, and I have to align with people that don't, and then you end up with a less than project. And you've probably seen some of those
Yeah.
that were less than, and so when you align with money sources, you have to make sure that you're aligned on the actual vision. It's not just about getting something made; it's about getting it made in the right way, with the right quality, with the right actors. And so it's super important for sure.
There's a lot of pieces you've got to juggle, huh?
There's a few pieces for sure.
That's for sure. So let's go back to the money thing for a minute, because you keep referring to that, and I think it's really important. Most people don't realize just how challenging raising money is, and like you say, it's not just about finding somebody with money; it's about somebody with money who also can fund your dream, that sees the vision you see, that's in alignment with where you want to go with this project. If I'm a producer starting out, do I need to find money, or am I going to go pitch to a studio and they're going to fund the film? How does all this stuff work for people that just really don't know much at all about this?
You need to go find your own money.
Okay.
For the most part, studio's not going to finance your movie. So, I've been in this town a long time. I've produced a lot of content at this point, and of the content that I've produced, I've only had 2 studios produce or finance, my films. The rest have been indie type style financing. But Paramount Pictures and Lionsgate both, financed, some projects of mine. So, but for the most part, I'm out there scratching and clawing, and with everyone else trying to find the right financial sources.
And on a typical film, do you have more than one funding source? Do you have to have multiple ones? Do you usually find one person or company or organization that wants to fund it? How does that work?
It's usually multiple. Very few people will finance solely. They want to mitigate their risk, and they want to make sure somebody else will drink the Kool-Aid with them.
Yeah.
I'm actually in post-production on a movie where there's one source for the financing, and it's very rare. It's going to be a great project. I was able to get my old friend Greg Kinnear.
Oh, great! Yeah,
come on board. He's fantastic, and so that'll be a film we bring out. I think we're going to bring it out theatrically probably in March, April, May, something like that.
Fantastic. So is it cool that theaters are back now?
It is cool. I think when we made Blue Miracle, we actually tested it in theaters with an audience, and it was the highest test score of any film that I had ever done. And we felt like we had a hit on our hands, and then literally a week later after our test, the world shut down. And we were fortunate. Netflix bought it and as a Netflix original and released it to the world. And I can't mention the numbers, but I will tell you that the numbers are astronomical on how many people have seen the film. And so that's incredibly satisfying as a filmmaker, because that it's impacting the world.
Yeah.
In fact, the orphanage down there in Mexico, no spoiler for you guys who haven't seen it, but they have received so many donations. They've received over 3,000 donations from 54 countries.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very cool.
And over $250,000 donated, and that was just in the first month of release. That's almost as much as they won, winning the tournament.
Oh man!
And so the orphanage is calling it the Green Miracle. So,
wow, that's very cool. Well, so let me get this Netflix thing straight. You actually finished the film before the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
And tried it in theaters. It came in great, and then the lockdowns happened. So you waited almost a year before you released it on Netflix, right?
Well, when we tested it last March, literally the week before the world shut down, we hadn't done any of the visual effects and the music and all that.
Okay.
So the movie didn't get finished until October, but we realized that the theaters weren't opening back up, and so our financiers were saying, "Hey, let's just see if there's a streamer that will buy it." And I was very fortunate to get Netflix to buy it, so it was great.
Fantastic. So when you meet other producers out there, what do you see the mistakes most producers are making out there, particularly younger ones coming up the ladder? What mistakes do you see? If you could really give them an encouragement, what would it be?
Well, I would say, mistakes that I made early on was that, I wasn't viewing myself as a company and as a business, and I was viewing myself as an employee. I was just trying to get hired by the next. So I wasn't viewing myself in a way that hey, hang on, in this business, you can be an entrepreneur, you can develop your own things. And so by the time I decided to launch, my company, Reserve Entertainment, same kind of different as me was the only project that I was really trying to figure out. I didn't have a pipeline of content. And so I was sort of, going, well, I'm going to get same kind of difference me made. That's how I felt. So when I launched my company, so this is a massive mistake. I had my Jerry Maguire moment, right?
Yeah.
I wrote a manifesto, and in writing this manifesto, I really felt like this is what I'm supposed to do, and I need to cut the ties with thinking as I just need to get hired, and I need to tell the stories God wants me to tell. And on top of that list was same kind of difference as me, but I didn't have a pipeline of other content. And so I write the manifesto, feel good. And then along the way, while I'm trying to get same kind made, I pass on 2 projects, that people were trying to hire me to do. And I said, oh, no. Ultimately, I went 18 months without a paycheck. 18 months. And
Woo!
I mentioned earlier in the podcast, my boys get up every morning and they want to eat. And so my mistake there was that I hadn't developed a lot of content. And so I didn't have any other options. I was that goofball running around with one project trying to get it made.
Okay.
And it ultimately, worked out. But had I had a bunch, I maybe could have gotten another one made in between that. So
Interesting. Well, that's a good word, because in my career over the course of, all these years, I've discovered that, a great idea is the worst thing in the world if it's the only one you've got. And very often I'll go into pitch projects and it's number 2 or number 3 the guy likes. Maybe he or she. I'm not in the first one. No, that's not really for me. And then if you got anything else, and I've discovered if you don't have anything else, you'll never get another meeting. And so right. I always take in 3 or 4 ideas. And in my career, it's been number 2 or 3, oddly enough, very often that they pick. So, I think you're exactly right. The ones with just one big dream, one big project, that's not going to help a lot.
Now, I've watched people have one project, maybe somebody offered to buy their script or whatever, and they turn it down, and then that thing just never gets made. And they'll literally spend 10 years, thinking they're the Shakespeare in Love sort of story that took 10 years to be made, but it doesn't get made.
Give me some advice for writers. One of the things that drives me nuts is that a writer will write their very first screenplay and assume this is going to be the big one. This is going to sell. It's going to be big. And yet you'd never have a person take one piano lesson and launch their concert career. Most of the professional writers I know have 10 or 20 screenplays they've never shown anybody. That was just their school, their education in learning to write screenplays, and others have boxes of screenplays they're out pitching. I just think that too many writers think the very first one out of the blocks are going to be the big one, but a professional writer is somebody that writes all the time. I mean, what would you give me some advice for writers out there?
First of all, I get pitched by writers all the time, so I have some great advice. I get pitched via email.
Okay.
And they don't give any context. I have no idea who these people are. I don't know if they've ever had a screenplay made into a movie. I don't know where they live. I know nothing about them. So if they're such great writers, why can't they write something amazing that catches my attention? It's just like, I have a script that I think I've seen your movies that I think you'll love, and then it's just like, that's all. Who are you? And how did you get my contact info? And why should I read your script? What have you done that makes, and so many mistakes sort of happen at that entry level of trying to communicate with producers because they don't sell themselves. They're trying to sell that idea, as opposed to what you just said. We need to go in and we need to develop a relationship with those executives or whoever that is, because it won't be about one idea. It might be about the third idea. And
that's good.
And so
that's good.
I can't tell you how many times I sort of want to send something snarky, but I remember when I was working with you, we talked a lot about tone. I don't remember about running your email back through a tone filter to make.
That's good.
And so I never respond snarky, although I would like to educate them, but that's not my job. I'm not here to educate.
Right.
So other mistakes for sure writers make when they're submitting to me is that instead of trying to build a relationship with me or trying to they're not reaching out and saying, hey, what kind of projects are you looking for?
Yeah.
And I can't believe how many people don't, if I get on a phone call with a Netflix exec, I'm like, so what's working for you guys? What are you seeing your audience is going to want in 2024?
Yeah.
And so we're not thinking that way because again, we're sort of held on to sort of our little idea.
That's really good. Well, it's funny in the age of Google, how few people will do a little homework. I've had guys come to me pitching horror movies. You know what? I don't produce horror movies. It's just one little internet search would tell you the kind of stuff we do. And yet so many people go in blind. I've seen guys pitch family movies to horror companies. It's just a little bit of homework would make a huge difference for people. The other thing, I loved what you said about asking what's going to work in the future. I remember Ralph Winter, our friend, was on this podcast about a year ago. And Ralph said, hey, I produce $200 million movies. And he said, it takes 5, 7 or more years to get that movie into theaters. And he said, so it's not what's popular now. It's about what's going to be popular 5, 7, 10 years from now. He said, so we're always working with the studio to figure out where the audience will be then. So what was hot last year or this year, it may not even be a consideration, but that's a good advice. I like what you're saying about that. That's really, really good.
Yeah. This movie that I'm in post on with Greg Kinnear is called Sight. And it's a 90%, Chinese cast. And so when we were developing it, we were developing it going, hey, the world is opening up.
Yeah.
And content is becoming more global when you think about how many countries, Netflix is in. And so, I start to look now for diversity in my projects. It's not just about a white family in Georgia,
Yeah.
Diversity in my things because I'm trying to think globally,
Smart.
And at the same time, still trying to stay with what's important to my core values, as a filmmaker.
So walk me through the process just real quickly, real briefly. How does a producer launch projects? You in Blue Miracle, you found, what was it, a news story?
News story. That's correct.
And what's the first call you make? Do you call a screenwriter immediately? Do you call a studio to say, hey, what do you think of this? How do you get momentum with a project going like that?
Yeah. So the first thing you do is you go find out who's involved in it and how to get those life rights.
Okay.
So we were able to get a hold of, Omar, the orphanage director. And so we were able to tie up the life rights and to get the orphanage Casa Ogar to agree to us making a movie, about them.
And
so,
you pay for those rights?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And are they for a certain period of time, or when you say life, is it for life? How does that work?
Oh, well, when I say life rights, we're getting someone's personal life story.
Right.
So
great.
If I want to make a story on Phil Cooke, which I will one day,
that's going to be expensive.
It will be expensive, but then I come and you sign your life story rights over to me, and it's usually an 18-month option.
Okay.
With a guaranteed another 18 months, that I can renew. But so I have locked up 36 months because I say to myself, if I can't get a movie made within 36 months, there's a chance that the world's just not going to receive it, or all the gatekeepers are saying, we won't finance it.
Now, is the agreement structured so that at the end of that 36 months, the film has to be made, or the film has to be in production, maybe?
Yeah, it can. You have lots of benchmarks that you
okay.
That if you have financing attached or a director, there are things that can extend that.
Okay.
You can keep I have one project. It's a World War II project that I've been developing for quite a while, and I'm super excited about it. And it's one that I believe in year after year. That is just about timing.
Yeah.
And that's a project where it's not about if, it's about when. And I keep renewing that option because I believe in it.
Now, development, a lot of writers, I've talked to a lot of writers who feel like, hey, if I sell my script, they have to produce it word for word. They have to do it exactly the way I wrote it. And they're not willing to budge a bit. So I immediately assume they're never going to sell that script. Development is the process of taking an existing script and really making it into something that can be filmed. Is that pretty much a good definition, or how do you view that?
Yeah, and I've learned over the years that I prefer not to work with somebody else's finished script because of that. A lot of people are just they're so attached to every word, um, they created, that it does make it challenging. So
Okay.
I prefer to start with the writer, and I prefer, this isn't arrogance, but I prefer to hire the writer.
Yeah.
That that way we get, as a producer, we get what we want. um and so, because again, writers, you know they'll have their own vision for things, and
Sure.
line up with where I'm headed. So
Well, people forget film is a collaborative process. There's a lot of people at the table. If you want to do it yourself, go on your back porch and write a novel or do a watercolor or something like that. But a film is a collaborative deal. So you have to make room for that, right?
it is very collaborative. And and writers hate to hear this, but most writers get rewritten. Either they have to rewrite themselves and they have to agree, or
Yes.
or the director comes in and does a polish, and it's just life. And then you find out that actors want to come in and they also want to, try their hand at writing, at least their lines. And so, yeah, that is the hard part for writers, is that they do their draft, but it goes through a lot of different filters before.
Okay. So here's a question about producing. The people will tell me today there's, studios in Atlanta, there's studios in Dallas, there's studios in New York or wherever, in Cleveland or wherever these days. Films are being made all over the place. And I just saw in the news, as we're coming out of the COVID thing, that there's a whole rash of states offering incentives to come film there. My theory is films are being made there, but they're not being green lighted there. They're still being green lighted in places like LA and New York. So if you're going to be a successful producer, is it advantageous to be around LA or New York or one of the major centers like that? Or could you live pretty much anywhere?
Well, I mean, fortunately, where you live doesn't matter anymore with what we're doing here on Zoom. It doesn't matter anymore. But what does matter is the relationships that you've built, and
Yeah.
and how you're building those, because that's what matters. And you're absolutely right. Very few of the films are being greenlit out of LA or New York. Uh, you know, it's just where things are happening. and
Yeah.
and so what yes, we're not making movies in LA any longer. We're making them in Georgia, or
Yeah.
my next one's probably going to be in Morocco. And I just got back from Vancouver. We're making them all over the world, but
Sure.
mostly they're coming out of LA.
Okay, good advice. Now, let me ask you this. You got a family. With your schedule, as much as you're on the road, filming all over the world, Morocco, places like that, how do you keep your family intact? How do you just give me a little personal viewpoint as a producer? How do you, keep the family moving forward and all this with all this craziness?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things in this business for a family man. It really is. My boys are in seventh grade and ninth grade,
Okay.
and they have been on movie sets all over the world. They filmed in the Middle East. They were in the Dominican with Blue Miracle. We've been all over the Southeast. We just got back from Canada. We filmed in Mexico, and ultimately, we as a family have traveled for the most part. And you know, and they do. They do homeschool. We hire teachers. In Vancouver, we hired a teacher to live in our house, a professional teacher from Canada. So we're every day we're figuring it out, and none of it's easy, and it's all a bit messy.
But because it's a priority, you are figuring it out. I think that's the important thing. Your family's a real priority.
Yeah, they are I feel like my boys need to, they need to eat dinner with me.
So let me ask you this: looking back over your career so far up to this point, if you did it, if you did it all over again, if you had a chance to start again, what's the one thing you do differently? Is there something like that?
And by the way, the first movie I made actually in 1999, it came out in 2001, was called All Over Again. So it's funny that you asked that question. And it really, the movie itself sort of answered that question. If you had to do it all over again, oh my gosh, I think that I would have probably started in the mailroom at CAA, or you know
Yeah.
try to just get in on a studio lot as a PA, and build relationships inside the industry. I've built them, but it's been a slower road, because I, you know, was it on the indie track, but I think I would have started really working for great companies,
Yeah.
just for the relational capital.
That's really interesting. I debate that constantly. I think I don't know that I'd go that direction or not, but I did. I chose to take the path of producing and directing my own stuff. So I've done hot tub commercials. I did a fantastic documentary for a company that makes sewer pipes. They loved it, by the way. And beat my head against the wall learning it myself. But I do think there's something to be said for getting on immediately at a major studio, even getting sandwiches, or like you say, in the mailroom, and learning how it's done from the inside. I don't know. It's a good debate. And at the same time, a lot of famous directors just went out and did it, raised the money and started doing stuff. So it's 50-50. I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, and hey, listen, one of my favorite stories. It was actually, if you remember the writers' strike back in early 2000. So
Yeah.
I produced one movie, all over again, and then there was this writers' strike, and like it felt like nobody could get movies made at the time, and somebody called me, at Ogilvy and Mather, and said, "Hey, would you produce commercials?" And I said, "Hey, I need a job. Back to
Yeah.
I got to eat." And I wasn't married at the time. I was single and able to live lean. And so I ended up at Ogilvy and Mather for a year during this whole strike, and I produced Barbie commercials. Uh,
Woohoo!
but let me tell you what, I learned a ton. I learned
Yeah.
what agency life was like, and then it led to one of my most embarrassing moments. I had a guys' weekend in Palm Springs playing golf. 8 guys meeting in Palm Springs, and I leave Ogilvy and Mather, and we had shot a dozen Barbie commercials that week, and jam out in my black Honda Civic, and pull up to the golf course where and they open the trunk, and all the guys are there to greet me, and there's like 24 Barbie dolls, pink Barbie dolls in the back of my vehicle, and I had a lot of explaining to do that week. But
That's
yeah,
good.
we do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
uh, and I will say that for you filmmakers, you young filmmakers, we have to do whatever it takes. It won't be given to us. That's how I view it. You talk about a director comes out, makes one movie, and they skyrocket. It happens. It doesn't happen often, and I think especially as those of us that are Christians, I think God uh, keeps us from that happening because He wants us to be dependent on Him, and we got to be willing to put in the work.
That's really good. That's really good. So, as we wrap up, is there, if you could leave people with one thing, now consider there's people listening who are writers, producers, directors, all kind of people that dream of making a movie or trying to make movies or in the process of making movies. If there was one thing you'd leave them with, what do you think it might be?
Well, I have an old friend of mine who used to say to me, "I have two words for you: good luck." No, 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 I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I believe, for me, writing my manifesto and really coming down and understanding who I was as a film producer, as a man, and the kind of things that I believe God wanted me to do with my life. It was very important for me. It was a defining moment. I do think that most of us that come, we don't, we just feel like maybe we're supposed to be here, but we don't know
Yeah.
exactly the path. And so I think at some point or another, we should write down and really dig deep in our soul and write it down. And it'll be a reminder. It'll be our true north, so to speak, of what we're supposed to be doing in town. And it keeps me grounded. I know exactly what I get up every morning to do. I don't punch in at a clock, but I'm sitting at my desk every single morning at 8:45 a.m. And at 5:45 every night, I step out of the office and because I got to go be a dad and a husband.
That's good.
But I'm ultra focused during the day at continuing to sort of live out and work out that manifesto that I wrote.
Awesome. Brilliant. So how do we get in touch with Reserve Entertainment? What's the website? What's your social media?
Yeah. So yeah, Reserve Entertainment on Instagram is probably the best place to stay up. Obviously, reserveentertainment.com is my website. I have 2 movies coming out in the spring. Family Camp.
Awesome.
I wish I could tell you. I was actually getting a phone call way around here. I believe we have an offer for a theatrical release for Family Camp probably in April. And
Fantastic.
then Sights most likely will come out in May. So 2 movies coming out. I'm doing a documentary right now that you can look for called Helen, following an Olympic athlete. So if you're going to watch the Olympics, look out for Helen. She won the Olympic gold medal 4 years ago for wrestling, first female U.S. wrestler to win.
Wow.
And it's in the movie we're making about her is her comeback because she had a career-ending head injury, and she qualified for the Olympics. And so we're tracking her journey. So it's really I haven't done a documentary in a long time, so it's exciting to do that.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I just think that a lot of people need to see examples of just everyday people, not, super high elevated guys in Hollywood, but just regular guys that are out there making movies and doing what we've all dreamed about and what we talk about. And you're probably a great example of that.
We're doing it for sure. So thank you so much for your time, Phil. Always love seeing you, and can't wait to be with you in person soon.
Good luck with the new movies coming out. We'll see you later.
Okay. Thanks, Phil.
Well, that was a great conversation with Darren. I tell you, I have such great admiration for a guy who's doing it every day of his life. He is really, he's walked the plank. He's gone out on the edge and is living the life of a producer. No safety net. He's just doing what he's always dreamed about. I'd encourage you, listen to this again, share it with friends that are interested in making a movie or interested in being a producer or a screenwriter. These techniques and ideas are really, really so important. And I would encourage you too, that if you haven't gotten my book, Maximize Your Influence, get it. If this is the reference really to make digital media work for you. If you've wondered how to really amplify your voice, amplify your message, get on the radar through social media, through the web, through short videos, through a number of other ways, this is the book that you need to read. Maximize Your Influence. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, influencematters.com. You can make a donation to the Influence Lab, our nonprofit that helps teach media to people around the world. So get on board, get the movie, get the book. It's great. I had to tell you what, Darren was great. And I encourage you, stay tuned, help rate us, do some comments down there. Let me know what you think of these episodes. Share it with friends because I'm so excited about bringing these kind of personalities and this kind of expertise to you. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.